You are listening to Influencers from the Conference Board.
The communications and PR industry has a diversity and inclusion problem. In 2017, 81% of the industry was Caucasian. But the PRSA Foundation and the Museum of Public Relations are doing something about it. Hello, I'm Alex Parkinson, Senior Researcher in the Marketing and Communications Center of the Conference Board. I joined Joe Cohen and Judith Harrison as they discussed diverse voices, profiles in leadership. The book features interviews with more than 40 top multicultural corporate and PR agency leaders who share their candid anecdotes about their successes, the obstacles they've had to overcome, and the lessons they've learned along the way. We present that conversation now.
Judith, thanks for joining us. I want to note that in your introduction to the book, you note that 81% of the public relations industry employees in 2017 were Caucasian. That's a much larger number than I thought it would be, to be perfectly honest. And I wanted to know from you, why do you think the industry has had such a hard time diversifying over many decades?
Thank you, Alex. It's a great question, and I think that it is a fairly horrifying situation, to be quite honest, when you look at the fact that 62.5% of the American population is white, and you look at our population and you think of how do we go about engaging with our new audiences. I think that there's a combination of things. I think that we have not been as intentional and proactive as we should be in terms of recruiting and going out to various colleges and universities to find diverse students who want to join our business. I think that at the mid to senior levels, we have not focused as much as we should on the competencies that are important in making one successful in a job and figuring out which skills from perhaps other related industries can be transferable to public relations. And I think that there's also a sort of unconscious bias component in which people look for people who are like them in some way. And I think the easiest and most superficial way of looking for likeness is just looking at a person. And sometimes there's that, and sometimes there's shared experiences as well, which also have a cultural component. So when you look at all of that, that just affects recruiting. And then you look at inclusion. When people get in the door, how do you treat them? How do you make them feel that they belong? I don't think that we've done a great job of that. So it's really a multifaceted conversation as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, and sticking with you, Judith, you mentioned unconscious bias there. I want to just explore that a little bit because it's a strong theme of the book. Could you give us examples of how that plays out in the communications industry and what we all need to do to make people aware of it?
Absolutely. Unconscious bias is something that we are all born with. It's basically evolutionary. Our brains were designed to think very quickly in circumstances that could be dangerous, and so we have carried that quick thinking over into the work we do and the way we live now, so that rather than analyzing things and analyzing people, we just sort of go immediately to cliches from time to time. And I think that's a critical mistake that we make. So unconscious bias shows up throughout all of our processes in the industry. The way we recruit, the way we decide who to promote, when to promote, who gets listened to in a brainstorming meeting, who gets taken to a new business pitch, who is selected to be the client lead. So there is no aspect of this business in which unconscious bias cannot play a role. And I think it does play a role throughout everything. And I think that people need to become aware that they are making snap judgments without thinking through not only the consequences, but looking much more broadly at who they could and should be bringing in and how they go about developing talent. And I will tell you, my one reservation or concern in this area is that when we talk about unconscious bias, we understand that everyone has it. I don't want people to feel that that is an excuse for their behavior. So it's one thing to say this is the way our brains were structured, and it's for fast thinking versus slow, but we really need to be aware and own our behaviors.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Judith. Joe, welcome. Thank you for joining us. You write the afterword for the book, and I want to just pull out something that you say in that and explore that a little bit. You say that diversity within communications enriches our perspective and improves our ability to communicate effectively to a multitude of audiences. Can you expand on that a little bit for me? Perhaps give us an example of how communications has changed with a diversifying population more broadly.
Sure. One, Alex, thank you for having us here, and I want to take a moment to thank the Conference Board for really supporting this project. When we launched Diverse Voices, we launched it not just as a PRSA Foundation and Museum of PR initiative, but we tried to engage the entire industry to help us, communications and marketing advertising industry, to help us shine attention on this issue. And Conference Board has been a wonderful partners, and we don't take that for granted, including this session today. It's very appreciated. As far as the issue that you raised, let's begin just by talking about the value of diversity and inclusion. There's, of course, a clear moral benefit as business leaders and as corporations and implementing diverse and include programs that center around diversity and inclusion. There's also a business benefit. And if you look at, there's many studies out there that show that companies that have diverse workforces perform better. One that immediately springs to mind is a McKinsey study that got a lot of attention, that came out about 3 or 4 years ago, and there's plenty of other research to back that. And what a lot of it comes down to is the idea that if you have a more diverse workforce, you're able to understand your stakeholders a little bit better. You know the issues that are on their minds, the topics that will resonate with them, the landmines that could happen if you misinterpret different behaviors and trends and research that you're seeing, and you're able to also more authentically speak in their voice. So that is part of what I mean by enriching our perspective. We need to, for communications, where in order to do the job well, you need to have that understanding. That's a big value to our profession specifically, but I think it applies across the board. One of the other benefits of having a diverse workforce and having strong practices as it relates to diversity and inclusion and equity, creating equity as far as opportunities for people of diverse backgrounds with people who are, white Caucasian males who typically tend to get more opportunities statistically proven. One of the benefits is that you're able to retain more of your best talent. You're able to create a more productive and collaborative work atmosphere, and your clients and stakeholders, many of whom increasingly care about that sort of thing, will take notice of it. So you asked for a specific example. I gave the research from McKinsey as a statistical example, but what I'll share from you from the perspective of my own perspective as a white Caucasian male who's in a leadership position is that until I took unconscious bias training, I didn't realize a lot of the little behaviors and little assumptions that I would make, that day-to-day interactions, even forgetting about looking at recruitment practices, day-to-day interactions that you may not just be aware of. Once you begin to educate yourself and train yourself, you start to become much more aware of what's happening around you as far as the perspectives of diverse members of your team and your company and your audiences, while also being aware of your own role and your own behaviors, even little things you say, little decisions you make that collectively can have a big impact. So I think that something as managers and as leaders, we need to really work at improving our perspective.
Yeah, I just want to build on that for a quick second, just to say that diverse workforces are extremely important, but the foundation for that is an inclusive environment.
Yes.
Because if you don't have that, then you're not really taking advantage of all of the differences that you were bringing to the table. So you're not learning anything, and you're not really bringing the best information and ideas to the table.
And what are the hallmarks of that, Judith? What are the hallmarks of an inclusive environment?
It's one in which people are engaged, one in which people feel that no matter who they are, they belong, that there isn't the idea that they must come in and fit into a very specific culture, which can be somewhat cliquish, but that the culture is open to accepting them and the differences that they bring. So that those differences are brought not just to the culture, but to the work, so that it better reflects all of the ideas that are around and better reflects the stakeholders for whom we are creating communications in the first place. So it's really about creating a sense of belonging in which everyone in the organization understands that this benefits everyone. It is not a special program. It is actually a strategic imperative, and everyone understands that that is the way it works and that it is aligned with the values of the organization.
Yeah, very interesting and important as well. I want to stick with you, Judith, and get a little personal because your profile is featured in the book, and it's a really fascinating read. In all candor, there are some really terrible anecdotes as well for you. The anecdotes are great, but the experiences were terrible for you about being a minority in the industry. And I just want to ask you, what do you hope that a young diverse candidate trying to get into this industry will learn from your profile? And if you feel compelled to share any of your anecdotes, then please do so.
Oh, I've shared enough. But I do think what I would like young, diverse people who want to get into the industry to take from this is that you can succeed no matter how many obstacles there may be in your path. I also want people of every background to understand that the road to the top of wherever you want to be is not a straight line. It's not as though you start out as an intern and then 10 years later you're at the top of the ladder and it was this totally smooth trajectory. Failure is often part of the path, and people have to know that, and they have to be prepared to deal with it. I think what I want people to take away from it is that with confidence, with grit, with the understanding of how to manage relationships and focus, that you can accomplish what you want to. It may not be the easiest thing in the world, but it is possible. And I also want people to understand, these young, diverse people we're talking about, that there are people out there who are waiting to help them. So it's not a lonely road. There are people who want to sponsor them, people who want to mentor them, and there is a real career path and a chance for them to succeed, even though they may not see as many people who look like them as they might want.
Yeah, so the point on mentoring, thank you for a smooth segue there, Judith, because mentoring is a really important topic that's covered in the book. I want to ask both of you, let's start with you, Joe. Why is mentoring to up-and-coming young, diverse candidates so important in this industry, but elsewhere as well?
I mean, well, thank you for bringing up that topic. It's a huge theme, and it was ever present throughout many of the 40-plus stories in the book, as was sponsorship. And I think we should probably talk a little bit about the difference between mentoring and sponsorship. Yeah. We'll start with mentoring. So, as I think many of us know, as we've grown our careers, having that person who is championing you, who's giving you that needed sage advice, who's helping steer you away from trouble situations, that has an enormous impact on people in their careers. I think that part of what we were looking to accomplish with the book was give a message to both leaders of diverse background and leaders who are, you could say undiverse, or leaders who are, your typical white Caucasian male leader who encompasses such a big percentage of our current leadership in comms specifically, make them understand that you need to go out and proactively help mentor some of these talented young professionals who are coming into the field. For people of diverse backgrounds, it's paying it forward. It's giving it back and helping to carry up people who are going to be the next generation of leaders. For individuals who are, who may tend to unconsciously gravitate towards others who are like them and coach mini-me's, people who remind them of what they were like earlier in their career, to really make a concerted effort to think outside of that and look for other individuals who may not be from their background or may not look or talk or think like them, spot that talent and help cultivate that talent. So that was something that was a very conscious decision of ours to make sure that that theme pulled through. And I believe both Judith and I acknowledged it in our comments in the forward and the afterward. As far as sponsorship, that's a little bit different than mentorship. So I'll tee it up, and then Judith, if you want to expand on it.
Sure.
What I would say is with mentorship, as I mentioned a moment ago, that's that day-to-day, week-by-week, month-by-month continual tutelage that you provide to an individual who you think is someone who has a lot of promise. Sponsorship's a little bit different. That is helping to create opportunities to shine attention on the individuals and put them in positions where they could succeed. It doesn't typically require the same amount of communication and same amount of teaching over a prolonged time frame or a compressed time frame, but it's more spotting people and giving them that opportunity. So I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Sure. I think I look at it as mentoring being someone who is helping you behind the scenes, someone who can help you figure out how to navigate the corporate environment, especially if you are brand new to corporate life. You may look around and think, I have no idea what I'm doing or where to go for information. And you certainly don't want to go and ask your manager what you think may be stupid questions. And so you have a mentor who helps you sort of figure out the lay of the land. That's really, really important. And then to Joe's point, does all the tutelage as well. A sponsorship relationship is different, and that a sponsor actually puts their own reputation on the line in a way to help that sponsored person move ahead. So the relationship is more of a two-way street, and so there are expectations of a sponsor, for lack of a better word, that we don't have of mentees. So it's that we expect great performance from someone that we're sponsoring, because we are then putting ourselves out there to advance them and saying that, senior people should consider them for stretch opportunities. They're ready to be promoted because we've seen them do X kind of work and they excel at it. It is different. And so the sponsee has a different responsibility and has to bring something more to the table than a mentee.
Okay, thank you for explaining those two concepts, and congratulations in the book, because you certainly pulled out both of those themes very strongly. So it's a fascinating read. We're going to turn to the audience in just a couple of minutes for questions, but I do want to ask one more question to you, Judith, about what other industries might be able to learn from corporate communications and public relations industry in terms of diversity and inclusion, or perhaps vice versa. As you said, the industry has had a tough time diversifying. Can others learn from their failures, or can people in communications learn from other industries too?
I tend to think of people in communications learning from other industries because they have been at it for longer than we have. We've been talking about it for a long time, but we haven't really been active and doing meaningful work for a long time. And when I started in my role, before I even got the role, I just called people from companies that were doing very well in diversity and inclusion to ask them how they did it. So we can learn from other organizations or other industries how to create employee resource groups for our various affinity populations, so that they feel connected and that the work they do as a group is connected to the business strategy as well. It's not just meeting for drinks. It's actually creates a learning environment where it helps people to move forward. I think that we can learn how to communicate much better at every level about not only diversity and inclusion, but just about difficult topics that people tend to want to shy away from. I think that we can learn much better how to go about giving difficult news, how to give reviews that are helpful, so that people understand exactly what's needed to move forward. One of the chief complaints that I have heard from multiple people of color in the industry is that they're not getting clear direction. They're not being developed. And so if people are afraid, if their managers are afraid to have these conversations with them, then clearly, development is going to be difficult and we're going to be losing people. So I think that other industries have cracked that code a little bit better than we have.
Any examples of industries that have done it really well?
Yes, I think the healthcare industry, pharmaceutical products specifically,
Okay.
is doing. I think they are doing a good job as far as that is concerned. I think the financial services industry is ahead of us. Not that it is nirvana by any means, but I do think that they are ahead of us in terms of not only having done it longer, but having more entrenched programs involved in this. I think management consulting is doing well. Also, I look at PwC as a shining example of what organizations can do,
Okay.
especially in terms of CEO communications. I think they are outstanding.
Wonderful. All right. That's some great tips of organizations and industries to look at. So thank you very much.
This has been Influencers from the Conference Board.